Hello, welcome again to the Grown Up Table. My name is Grant Swartzwelder. I'll be your host for this journey. I want to start off a little differently, though, this time, because as you know from the website, we talk about conversations of life and character. And this particular episode probably manifests that more than any, because it talks about someone's life and the transformation they made. So when I came up with the idea of this podcast, as it turned out, this episode probably typifies or really exemplifies, I guess I should say, what this is all about. So I'm so excited about having our guest on that I'll introduce in just a moment, because of the material, the story that it really will share with you. So I hope you enjoy it, and let's get started. So first of all, let's set the table. It was April 19th, 1995, a quiet day in Oklahoma City when a truck bomb went off out front of the Murrow building and exploded, killed 168 folks, injured many more. And it's at that point I want to kind of stop sitting the table and let my guest really go through it, because she was there. Another personal note I want to bring up, Amy, was that, when I saw the Netflix documentary and I saw your story, and I reached out to you with LinkedIn, never thought you'd respond. And in today's world, people tend to not respond. And that you responded and are willing to tell this story and take time from your day, that is one of the biggest gifts I've received in quite some time, because you find in today's world that does not happen. So that's one of the first things. Second thing is, and I know we're going to talk about your book about Hope is a Verb, and a story of transformation, impossible transformation. And the message of that is really important too. But so that's my little plug as a personal note. But so with that, let me introduce Amy Downs, who survived that bombing. And instead of me telling the story, Amy, I'd love to ask you to kind of tell your story of how it goes, and then we'll talk about some of the segments that kind of ease into what happened after that, because it seemed like that bombing was the beginning of really your life and the changes associated with your life. So Amy, welcome to Grown Up Table. So excited to hear you talk.
Grant, it is an honor to join you in conversation today. And I don't usually answer LinkedIn messages, so
I don't blame you. If you were me, I wouldn't either. So, but thank you.
But I believe in what you're doing here, and I thought, I'd like to have a conversation.
Well, I'm glad you have pity in your heart for me. So,
well, you're right. I feel like, in a lot of ways, my life did begin after the bombing in April 1995. It was an awful journey, and not one that I would wish on anyone.
I bet.
But all of us go through difficult things in our lives at different times, and I really believe in the quote by an ancient Greek philosopher named Epictetus that goes, it's not so much what happens to you, but how you choose to respond to it that matters. So we can talk about that in a little bit on how I chose to respond to what happened. But to answer your question and take you back to April 19th, 1995, I was working in the financial institution in the federal building in downtown Oklahoma City. I worked for a small credit union in that building. We had about 28 employees, and the morning of April 19th, I was very excited because I was getting ready to close on my very first house. So I was running around, not working, chatting with all my friends, talking about the house, showing them pictures of it. I was super excited. And as it got close to 9 o'clock and I realized, I had completely goofed off the entire first hour of my day. I really better get to work before I get in trouble. I go down, sit down at my desk, which was front and center of the building on the third floor. If I would have walked about 20 feet to the front glass windows and looked down, I would have seen the Ryder truck there, but I had no idea.
No.
I sat down at my desk to start working, and a girl that I work with who was 7 months pregnant sat down beside me to ask me a question. When I turned to ask her what she needed, that's when the bomb went off. And it was all, in an instant. I could hear this just tremendous roaring in my head. It was so loud. Everything went black, and I could feel the sensation that I was falling. I could hear a woman screaming right in my ear, "Jesus, help me, Jesus, help me." And then I realized that that woman screaming was me. I didn't even recognize the sound of my own voice. And I could hear screaming all around too. And then all of a sudden it all stopped, and I couldn't see anything. I remember trying to open my eyes. I thought my eyes were open, but I couldn't see anything, and I couldn't move. I found out later I was still in my chair, upside down, buried under 10 feet of rubble. I had fallen 3 floors. And in those first few moments, I remember wondering, first of all, of course, what happened. And the only thing I could think of was that maybe I had been shot in the back of the head. When you work for a financial institution, you're always worried about robbery. And
Sure.
I thought maybe a robbery had gone wrong and I had been shot. And then I wondered, was I even still alive? And then I became aware of a siren going off in the distance and thought, okay, I'm still alive. I can hear this siren. But I screamed for help, and there was nothing.
No.
It was about 45 minutes before I heard men's voices. And these men, the man said, let's split up. Let's look for the daycare babies. There was a daycare on the 2nd floor. I worked on the 3rd floor. I didn't understand that we were all at the bottom of what was once this 9-story building. But I started screaming, immediately. And the man said, I hear you, child. How old are you? And I remember not answering right away because I was afraid if I told him I was 28 years old that he wouldn't come get me. Finally, I said, I'm 28. And he says, that's okay. That's okay. He says, we have a live one. He starts yelling, I need backup. I need help. We have a live one. And so as they made their way to find where I was located, they couldn't see me. So they had to follow the sound of my voice. And my right hand was sticking out of the side of the rubble pile. And when they brushed my hand, I said, I think that's me. I think you touched my hand. At this point, they grabbed my hand to pull me out. I'm thinking, oh, great. 1, 2, 3, they're pulling me up and out.
Easy.
But about that time, the rubble started shaking all around. And I could hear people yelling, there's another bomb. There's another bomb. Everybody out now. There's another bomb. Let's go. Let's go. And so I just started telling my rescuers over and over again my name, and to tell my family I loved them, because I knew that this was it. And with that, they were gone. And
that had to be one of the hardest parts, because you thought you had been saved, and then thinking that another bomb was probably going to go off, it turned out to be a fake or a demo. Right. But how did you handle that?
So at this point, I remember, my reality was there's another bomb that's getting ready to go off. So this is it. Your life is over. And I remember laying there, can't see anything, can't move. It's very hard to breathe.
Sure.
And I remember just thinking, I'm 28 years old. I'm getting ready to die. And I've never really lived. And the reality just hit me so hard that I had not really lived my life with any purpose or intention. And I had a lot of regrets for the wasted time, not having really lived. So I had been praying pretty much the minute the bomb went off, just nonstop, begging God for help. And I remember, laying there thinking, trying to remember a scripture that I could, maybe help ease my anxiety. And the only scripture I could remember was, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. But then that was all that I could remember. So that did not help. I remember the irony of it, just thinking, I don't know what comes next. Like, I really don't know what comes next, And then of all the really strange things to do, I began to sing. There was a song we used to sing growing up in church. It was just a little praise and worship song. And I started singing. And when I did, I felt peace. I didn't know that I was going to make it out alive, but I was okay with what was getting ready to happen next. And of course, there was not a second bomb. And it was about a 45-minute ordeal that I was laying there waiting for the second bomb. And the men came back and they started working to get me out. But the place where I was located was very unstable, and it was very difficult, and it was not easy to get me out. It was going to end up taking them 6.5 hours to get me out.
Wow.
Yeah. But these men were incredible. They risked their lives to get me out. And, the wind was picking up, our weather turned, the wind was picking up, and the building was extremely unstable, what was left of it. They later had to implode the building to remove the last 2 bodies, which were located near me, because it was not even safe to go back in to get them. So I am just, very grateful to these men for getting me out.
Yeah, it's amazing how people can step up in a time of. So they get you out. You go to the hospital for 8 days, I believe. Have some some significant injuries, and then what?
So I had the largest injury was my leg. My leg had essentially been blown open, but my bone was intact. The surgeon told me, he said, this is probably the only time that a doctor is going to tell you that your weight probably worked in your behalf. So my bone was still intact. And the hardest part was not the physical injuries. The most difficult part was finding out one by one that 18 of my 33 coworkers had been killed. The girl that was sitting waiting to talk to me, who was 7 months pregnant, was killed. My best friend at work with 2-year-old and 3-year-old baby girls at home, she was killed. It was extremely difficult. And our little credit union, we only had one office, and it was in that building. They gave us free space, so we didn't even have margin built into our business to pay for rent.
Sure.
And we had to figure out, losing over half of our employees, how we were going to function. How are we even going to reinvent ourselves? So at first, I really poured myself into trying to help the organization, start over. And that was extremely difficult. But it was also a good distraction from what was happening, to be able to focus on work. Initially, when they pulled me out and I'm on the gurney and they took me out of the back of the building, I remember looking up at the sky and promising God I would never live my life the same. And even though those first couple of years were dark and very difficult, I kept going back to that moment. I knew that as I gained strength and as I got through this, I was somehow going to change the way that I was living my life.
When you say it was dark, and can fully understand that, was that physically? Was that financially? Was that emotionally? Probably yes to all of those, but was there a big one that weighed on you more than the other?
The emotional, just the emotional damage, the emotional trauma.
Sure.
From everything from PTSD, fear, of what you've been through. Is it going to happen again? Am I going to go somewhere? And, all of a sudden, all the bad things I saw in the news all those years now meant something that could actually happen to me. They weren't things that happened in other countries. Like maybe it could happen. Maybe somebody, I can remember being at a concert and getting scared and leaving because I was thinking there's these thousands and thousands of people. This would be a perfect place to do something bad, and then just getting scared and leaving. So there was a lot of psychological junk, to work through.
And how did you do that?
I was determined that I was going to live. I remember one day sitting in my living room thinking, My friends would not want me to sit in my house, draw the shades, so to speak, and never leave again. Like, I'm still here. I'm meant to live my life. I've got to do it. And it didn't come natural. I had to force myself to like get out of the house, force myself to like start doing a hobby that I loved, which had been gardening. And I remember forcing myself. I didn't want to, just trying to force myself to move forward in a positive way.
So tell us, the audience, kind of what's happened since then. You went on, got a degree, 2 degrees, I guess. Take the story from there, just for what the closure has become.
So as, the first few years working through the grief and the trauma, as, I begin to heal some. And it's not a thing where I can tell you that, there was closure and, on this day I was healed. And, anybody who's walked through difficult times knows it doesn't ever go away. You're left with scars. It's still there with you. Sure. But as I began to gain strength, as I began to work through some of this, I kept thinking about, how do I want to live my life? And one of the first things that came to me was going back to school. I wanted to get my degree. It bothered me that I had flunked out of college because I couldn't pass a math class. I wanted to give it another try. And so the very first thing that I set for myself was to go back to college. And it was difficult. I was working. I had a small child. It was like, how do you do that? Well, you do it one class at a time, one step at a time. And I had been learning through my work, because we had to go overcome a lot of challenges with business. I just took the same model that I was using at work and started applying it in my personal life. And that was to say, okay, if you had a magic wand, what would you really want? Like, what kind of person do you want to become? What kind of things do you want to do? What do you want your life to look like? And then, given your current situation, your current limitations, what are the smallest steps forward that you can take to get to a version of that thing that you just dreamed? And so, I kept doing this over and over again. So I went back to school, I got my degree, then I got my master's, and then I began tackling some health issues. And I had a weight loss surgery and lost a couple of 100 pounds, and then started changing my life physically, and found a bicycle that I could ride, and started riding a bike for 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes, and then 10 miles, and then eventually across the state of Oklahoma, and then started running and did a marathon, started swimming, and then that led to triathlons. So I started doing triathlons, and when I turned 50, I did a full Ironman. Which is a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, and a 26.2 marathon, all within 17 hours, and time cuts along the way. And I did an Ironman. And
that's fantastic.
I also became CEO of the credit union that I started out working as a teller. The same credit union that was in the bombing, I ended up becoming the CEO.
So it's a full, as you say through your book, a full transformation almost of you as an individual, but also as a professional. And so since then, you've retired, you've given various speeches, presentations, podcast. And so I think really telling your story of, and so what I'd love to do is kind of take several of the themes that you've alluded to here and kind of delve a little deeper in some of those. And that first one you mentioned of kind of the spirituality, the religion. Let's dig into that a little bit. Were you very religious when the bombing happened, or did that kind of thought about God, where did that come from at that point?
Well, I had grown up in a faith-based Christian home when I was young. Then, in my 20s, I kind of, it's not like I ever had a moment where I said, I don't believe in God. I just kind of took my life and decided I could handle it on my own, I guess.
Well, you get busy, you want to sleep in.
Yeah,
a lot of people
it just sort of was a part that I drifted away from.
Sure.
And in the moment where I thought I was getting ready to die, eternity was looking straight at me. And all of a sudden, I realized that I needed God in my life. And after the bombing, I did not want to go through, I didn't feel I could go through this life without God. So that was the first change, would be spiritually. But
at the moment of the bombing, you looked at God as hope and not as why me, and kind of took it down the negative path. Because I think a lot of people would say, well, God, why are you doing this to me? But that doesn't seem like that was what you did.
I know I had a few poor me, why me moments along the way, but I survived. I had a good story. It was hard to stay in that for too long, because I'm looking around me at the family members of my coworkers who are mourning the deaths of their loved ones, and I'm still here. So, I sort of had the contrast of that comparison around me.
And you think since the bombing, that spirituality, the faith in God, what has that provided? What has the fundamental issue that it's helped you with?
Well, just at the very, just take it to the raw, just basic thing. Okay. For me,
Sure.
For me, and, having a relationship with God, I'm not alone. He's always there, and I can draw strength from God. I can talk to God. My faith and my hope is in a higher power. It's not in this world. And so that gives me a comfort and a reason to keep going.
Because I could imagine being upside down under 10 feet of rubble, you feel very alone. But then I'd almost think that a year or 2 years later, after everyone has kind of forgotten about the survivors or moved on to the next sound click, that you could almost feel more alone then than you could when you're buried upside down.
Well, I mean, even if you've never been through a bomb, how many people, how many women and men that I've talked to that face loneliness in their everyday lives. I mean, it's something that everybody deals with. So, yeah.
And so this comes back to one of your points of, so how do you make that initial step? Because that seems like, because I would think if I was in your position, I'd be like in a fetal position underneath a table, but you made that initial step. How's that happen? And then is that just like a New Year's resolution where you make that step and then you kind of forget about it and you're back in the fetal position? It's like,
well, there's a couple of things here. So I would say with the spiritual aspect, there was no plotting or planning. There was, Amy, you're getting ready to die. You better make things good with your maker. Okay. I mean, that just came to me. That there was no, let's write out a New Year's resolution. Like it's
not like you had 20 minutes to think about it. You were there.
No. So that was a little bit different. That just immediately was something that I stepped into. All the other goals, all the other things that I've identified that I want to do in my life have been more structured, and they have been more like, I want to do an Ironman. Okay, what does that look like for me? What kind of training? How does that work? Is it something I am going to dedicate the time to? Is it really important to me? And then if it is, what are the smallest steps consistently over time that I can take? Because if I make my steps too big, I'll procrastinate them. I won't do them. So it has to be very easy, and it has to be something I genuinely want. If it's a goal that is something I think I should do or somebody else wants me to do, that's not going to withstand the time test for me. It has to be something that's deeply important to me.
But when you say, and that makes so much sense that you got to take step by step, but that means a long period of time. Mm-hmm. And most humans can't commit themselves over a long period. And I would argue that that is how it has to be done. The chance of being an overnight wonder and do a marathon or do whatever, get a degree, no, it's going to take time. But that is every step, taking a step. That's almost even harder.
Mm-hmm. Well, so there's a quote I really love about hope that came from a book called Hope Rising. And it goes something like that. Hope is the belief that your future can be better and brighter than your past.
Sure.
And that you actually play a role in making it happen. So essentially, hope is having a goal, having a pathway that you have agency over to reach that goal. So as far as how you keep that alive for yourself, I have ADHD, so I have to have a lot of tools to help me.
Sure.
I use a planner, like an old school pen paper planner. I do a vision board for myself every year where I put visual cues up on the wall so I can see them, so I can keep them present. I have a habit every morning of sitting with my goals, looking at them. What am I doing today to move myself forward? Keeping it present, checking in on those goals every day. It's not something that I fall asleep to. Now, anybody who has worked, if you've, especially if you've been a supervisor, if you've had goals that your boss has given you, you do it at work. And that was my thing. One day I sat there and thought, I do this at work all the time. I take action steps. I make things happen. Why can't I do that with my own life? And that was the changing point for me when I realized I can. Like, I can treat my own life like I've been doing work. Take the shame out of it, take the emotion out of it, just treat it like a work project. Like, given my current situation limitations, and I want to lose weight, but I like to eat, and I've tried all these other things that haven't worked for me. Okay, well, what else is there? Let's dive into it. What can I do? And so that's how I would tackle it.
When I was sitting down to talk to you, I thought all of that would be triggered by you surviving the bombing. But to some degree, I kind of hear you say that, yes, that was clearly there, but you also reached a point after that you said, I need to change. I want to change. And in a way, obviously, most people watching this, they're not going to go through a bombing to have a life-changing thing. So that might actually be better, saying, no, you don't have to go through a bombing. You can actually change your life at this point.
That's exactly right. Another book called The Regrets of the Dying. A hospice nurse wrote a book about the regrets of the dying.
Yep.
And the number one regret of those people dying is not living a life true to themselves. So all of us at some point, if we live long enough, we're going to look back over our lives and we're going to think about it. And none of us should have regrets, not when it is as simple as stopping and checking in with yourself, not letting yourself be on autopilot, not being complacent, not letting life pass you by, but really stopping to say, do I like the direction I'm going right now? Do I need to course correct? What is it that's important to me? What relationships do I need to spend more time on? And being intentional about spending time, investing in those relationships, for example.
Well, and the regret, that was another one of so you spoke very eloquently about that. Let's also talk about grief, because obviously what you went through, losing so many of your friends, overcoming that grief, because I think a lot of people use that grief or use grief as a crutch to not push forward. So again, the regret, the spirituality fits in, but speak to that as far as how you overcome the grief, of all those losses and your position to move forward.
Grief to me, I've heard somebody else say this, and it's true. It reminds me of, walking along a beach and the water, the tide might be low and it's just sort of coming up gently, hitting your feet. And then at other times a big wave comes in and it just knocks you down.
Yep.
It's just, grief is just, I don't know the magic formula for getting over grief. It's with me occasionally. It is still, it will still overtake me. But, time does have a way of healing.
And the grief that overtakes you, is it, what part of, is that because the friends that you lost, or just the overall, what happened?
So, I have some very close friends that I lost.
Sure.
And
can you imagine?
then you also throw in the survivor guilt.
Yeah.
That I'm still alive, I'm here, and my friends were not. And my very close work friend had baby girls that have now grown up into beautiful young women. And in particular, one of them I see quite often. And often after I see her, and I love seeing her because she looks just like her mom, personality just like her mom. I even accidentally call her by her mom's name sometimes, but I will sometimes, feel very emotional after I've spent time with her, because I wish that my friend was still here to see her daughter. She'd be so proud of her.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that. So the 30th anniversary was just earlier this year. Is that a trigger point where each anniversary, or?
Yeah, anniversaries for most people who have gone through some type of trauma, even losing a loved one close to you.
Oh, you bet.
You'll remember the time of year. You may not even remember their death anniversaries coming up, but that change of seasons or something you'll feel on edge. You're not sure what's going on, and then all of a sudden you remember, oh, it's that time of year. It's very powerful, the anniversaries.
Okay. Last topic that I want to go into is, again, back to your book, Hope is a Verb, My Journey, and of Impossible Transformation. But the two key words that I loved was the verb and the journey, because those were action. And back to what you said, where it's step by step. And I really want to visit about that, because that speaks to transformation. That speaks to digging yourself out of a situation, grief, regret, whatever. What more can you offer on that?
So I'll go back to the quote. It's not so much what happens to you, but how you choose to respond to it that matters. Things happen to us that are not fair sometimes. They're not our fault.
Yep.
They're not fair. How do you choose to respond to it? If you just stay in that victim role, you really can't move forward in your life and live, a life that is joyful and fulfilling, in my opinion. If you take responsibility for where you're at, even though whatever happened to you wasn't your fault, but you take responsibility to move forward, and you say, you know what, I'm going to still imagine the future that I want. And given my situation and my limitations, I am going to start taking active steps to move toward it. That's when you now are living intentionally and with purpose, and you're moving towards something. And that is what hope is to me. That is hope, is moving forward to work toward that future that's better and brighter than your past.
I think that's a wonderful way to end this, Amy. Thank you so much. And so let's clear the table here. I think what you just heard was a story of, again, action, and taking a very terrible situation and making it so much better for so many other folks, for yourself, for Amy, but also for the community. And the whole action of doing hope, not just hoping for hope, is, I think, just an amazing thought process, but hard to do. But if you get on that traction, you're able to achieve that, and it can have a very evolutionary type effect on your life. So hopefully, when you think about having conversations on life and character here at the Grown Up Table, you remember what Amy has said. I urge you to go get a copy of her book, because it's a wonderful story of what we've just discussed and how individual steps can make your life so much better. So hopefully I'll see you again. If you like what you're hearing, please follow us. Please forward this to others. And I look forward to seeing you on a following episode. Thank you.